Ladies and gentlemen, my guest tonight is not a politician, is not a powerful military leader, is not also a man from the world of entertainment who is a very influential actor. He is from an increasingly restrictive field, but his views are the views of a man which transcend geographical boundaries, which impress public policy, thought, and leadership across the globe. And I welcome Mr. Thomas Friedman to NDTV.
Great to be with you.
Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Mr. Friedman. And I said that, your field, which is of, I will not call you a journalist, I'll call you a public intellectual.
Thank you.
That field is increasingly getting restrictive. Would you agree with me?
The commercial demands on media, I think, restricted, because to do serious journalism takes time, it takes money. That's one of the problems. We have new phenomena like TikTok, where people look to reduce things and become influencers on 15-second videos. So, but I'll tell you what I've really found. It's quite interesting because the New York Times is doing very successful as a newspaper. We now have 10 million digital subscribers around the world, and that's amplified because many people will read, for one subscription. Is that if you do something long and it's compelling, people will read it. We on our news site, we know how many people click on your article, how long they spend on the article, whether they finish the article. And I've been very encouraged by the fact if you do serious, compelling journalism, there's still a big audience for it.
Mr. Friedman, I spoke about restrictions not so much from the consumer point of view or from the audience or the viewership point of view, but from the point of view of the fact that we are increasingly living in a much, much higher polarized world.
Yes.
The time 2 decades back or so when I started to work, polarization was not so much a bothering phenomena. It was not even a bothering phenomena for journalists. Forget about public intellectuals like you. It was not even a bothering phenomena for journalists. So today the world is increasingly polarized, and that is why it is my sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the space for public commentary or neutral public commentary for the larger public good, for the larger public welfare is increasingly getting restricted.
Well, I always tell young journalists, if you want to be an opinion columnist at the New York Times, it's not a friend growth industry, okay? You really do need to have thick skin, and you need to have triply thick skin in the age of social networks. So I've said before many times, I do not follow Facebook. I do not follow Twitter. I use Twitter as a broadcast platform to get my column out there, but I don't follow it. And I've never smoked a cigarette either. And I plan to kind of die saying all three, okay? And the reason is there's way too many journalists looking over their shoulder every day at what is said about them when they write. And that's death in this business. You have to believe in what you write. You have to get it out there, and you have to take the criticism. But if you're looking over your shoulder all the time because you're worried about what is said about you on social media, you're never going to survive in this business. You should be an ophthalmologist. You should be something else, not a journalist, because this is not a friend growth industry.
Let me talk about social media. You often describe social media as some sort of a huge emotion-evoking mechanism.
Yes.
You've often described it as that. And part of the reason why the world finds itself in the throes of so much of polarization and so much of commentary that is probably without basis and so much of public opinion for the first time, which is in a way unfiltered, let me not call it regulated, but unfiltered,
yes,
is social media. But whenever it comes to some kind of regulation on big tech or social media firms, they start to hide behind the same curtain which they have been damaging all along, that is democracy.
Well, I think democracy works fine when NDTV and the New York Times are edited. That you cannot just print any lie about someone in India, about your prime minister, about a member of your cabinet, about a business leader, about a movie star. And if you do, you're asked to correct it. Same at the New York Times. Why should that be different for Facebook or Twitter or anybody else? I think people should be responsible for what they carry on their websites. And the fact that you have this sort of double standard, and Lord knows we have comment section in the New York Times. I have comments on my columns. It's usually 1,500, it can be 2,000 comments on your column. And they're wide ranging. I mean, people be super critical, or maybe they'd be supportive, whatever. So it's not like we don't give voice to people. But you shouldn't be able to say anything about anyone, anytime. And when you do, the American, political scientist, Jonathan Haidt, he calls it having a dart gun. You know what I mean? So that the ability to forward a tweet or to like, a post, he equates it to everyone now has a dart gun. So I forward this angry tweet about you. It's a dart gun. You know what I mean? And when everyone in the world has a dart gun, it gets really dangerous out there, and it gets really frightening, and it gets really intimidating. So a lot of people, people often ask me, say, would you ever like to go into politics? I say, I would. I'd like to run for high office on one condition. I get to keep my column at the New York Times. I would not want to be out there as a public figure where everyone has a dart gun and I don't.
Mr. Friedman, then again, I come back to my original question to you. The fact is that it is all in the name of democracy, that the big tech is giving this, as I said, unfiltered power to almost everyone on the planet. I mean, it's free for all. And it's damaging the democracy. We've all seen it over the years with our experience. I don't think one needs to be ambiguous about it. The experience is quite clear that it has been a damaging experience for democracies across the world. In fact, there is a large question mark now on the future of democracies themselves. So how do you deal with as a journalist, of course, we cannot probably champion too much of regulation. But how do you deal with this kind of unfiltered opinion in the public domain, which is now hurting the very bedrock of the system that first allowed it that opportunity?
Well, you really hit on a very important point, because what are the two pillars of democracy? They're truth and trust. Without truth, we don't know which way to go. Without trust, we can't go there together. And nothing big and hard can be done except together. And so when you have social networks that are destroying both truth, we don't know what is true, you say it's this, I say it's that, and now with AI, they'll be able to fake so many things out there. And if there's no trust, because everyone's got a dart gun, basically, hitting the other person, it's very hard to maintain a democratic system. And in America, when you have one of the candidates who has the biggest dart gun of all, named Donald Trump, and has the biggest problem with telling the truth, and you put those two together, it's extremely frightening for the future of democracy. And it pains me that countries like China or Russia, their leaders say to their own people, well, the reason we curtail free speech, of course, is this. Do you want to be like the Americans or the Indians, where anyone can say anything? And of course, they're doing it for their own reasons. But there's just no question that if I were to draw a picture of America for you today, it would be of a boiling pot. Now, the pot would be boiling because we're going through a lot of social transformation, many more diverse people coming together. We're going through a values transformation around gender and sex and identity and race. Also, all big transformations. And we're going through a technological transition of jobs being really radically changed. So we're going through a lot of transitions. That alone is boiling the pot. Then along came Mark Zuckerberg with social networks, and he turned the heat up on the pot. And then along came Donald Trump, and he took the lid off the pot. And he made it profitable, possible, and permissible to say and do things to and about each other that we never did before. And that combination is really roiling the country now. Everyone's on edge, okay? But it's also undermining the foundations of our democracy.
That's what, it's interesting how you bring in AI. The previous interview that I conducted today was one of the AI giants, and somebody who was actually in the public policy sphere also during President Obama's administration, Mr. Diamond.
Yes.
And I come back to the point that, with the AI phenomena, with deep fakes now coming into play, with almost anybody for that matter, can be faked or be represented.
Yes.
Represented in a manner that is, completely fake. It's complete fakery.
Yes.
I know you have used fakery for something else. I don't want to bring that in right now.
Yeah.
But, I mean, complete fake representation is possible through AI.
Yeah.
I mean, what perils are we staring at, Mr. Friedman?
Yeah, it's frightening. What did Mark Zuckerberg tell us with social networks? Let's move fast and break things. Well, they moved fast and they broke a lot of things before regulation could catch up to what they were doing. And once it was embedded, then it was very hard to go back and tell them and impose on them this regulation, because these companies get so big, bigger than governments. They have so much money, they can out-lobby you, 100 to 1. And so I'm net worried. Look, there's huge potential that's going to come from artificial intelligence. It's actually incredibly exciting when you think about it from an Indian point of view. Within 3 or 4 years, there's an Indian farmer in southern India who may wake up one day and he sees a spot on his hand, okay? And he goes to maybe the local clinic and they say, that could be a melanoma. He's going to be able to take out his phone, he's going to take a picture of that spot, and he's going to have access to the very best medical diagnosis known to man, okay? A farmer who never had access to that before. He'll have the best, we call N of 1, just for him, prescription to deal with that melanoma, and it'll be delivered not just in his language, but in his dialect. So the potential here is for improving the quality of life for everyone on the planet, the quality of health, the economic opportunities for people. It's staggering. But the flip side is, bad guys are always early adopters. And there will be a bad guy out there who will take that same technology and use it to fake or to rile up or to enrage or to divide. And we're just at the beginning of trying to figure out how do we possibly manage that. And the thing about it is we're doing it in an age where, people often ask me, Mr. Friedman, is the world still flat? To which I say, oh baby, it's flatter than ever, okay? We aren't just connected. We aren't just interconnected. We're now interdependent, okay, in ways we were not before. The only question left is, are we going to have healthy interdependencies or unhealthy interdependencies? India, Pakistan are interdependent. Will it be healthy or unhealthy? Ukraine and Russia, healthy or unhealthy? Israelis and Palestinians, America and Mexico. We're now more independent than ever before. But we are going to rise together or we're going to fall together. But baby, whatever we're doing going forward, we're doing it together. So when that's the case, we really need to find ways to collaborate on these things more than ever before.
Mr. Friedman, going back to globalization where you start the world is flat, this is obviously an era of globalization reversing itself in so many ways, This is an era of deglobalization, as many would call it.
No, I don't think so at all. There's some reglobalization going on, but not deglobalization.
Okay, but obviously you said that the laying of optic fiber cables across the world for the worldwide net, undersea cables, fasten that pace,
yes.
Completely increase that pace.
Yeah.
In the world of the AI, you don't need any cables. I mean, it's obviously going to increase that interconnectivity or globalization or the impacts of the AI globalization. I mean, as you said, bad, good, both.
Yeah.
It's going to be much faster. And going back to the experience of the big tech firms, as you said, that if we were unable to put regulation in the correct time, and now they have become so big, as I said, that whenever you try to regulate them, they always will cry and hide behind the curtain of democracy, saying our rights are being curtailed, not admitting for a moment that they are the biggest hurt to the democracy today. So similarly, for it not to happen with the AI, what should the governments do? What should the democracies do particularly?
I don't have the simple answer for that. It's a hugely complicated question because AI is a rapidly evolving technology. Yet we don't even know exactly what AI will add up to, at the end. All I know is there's got to be a symbiotic dialogue at all times between the innovator and the regulator. Because basically in the industrial age, the rule is simple. I, business, innovate, you, government, regulate.
Yes.
But then the gap between, the knowledge gap between the regulator and the innovator was tiny. Now, in so many cases, the regulator has no idea what the innovator is doing. I mean, we had a senator famously questioning Mark Zuckerberg, Orrin Hatch, and said to him, Mr. Zuckerberg, if you give your product away for free, Facebook, how do you make money? So the regulator had no clue how the innovator's business even worked. And so it's got to be a much more symbiotic relationship. These old binaries, left, right, regulator, innovator, they all break down. And there has to be a much more collaborative kind of governance.
But Mr. Friedman, the business itself, I mean the innovator itself, if you term it innovator, is certainly not going to surrender his interest. And his interest is, of course, as much unregulated business as they can do, possibly for them.
That's why God created governments, okay, and to impose regulations on them when they have to. And we have to step up to that.
You mean to say that step regulation, and this probably is the right moment?
Well, I think it's very important to let the low-end AI go as fast as it can, okay, while at the same time focusing on the high-end, high-risk elements. We want the innovation to happen because I go back to that farmer example. That's hugely important and valuable to the world, and there's a zillion of those that will happen. But at the same time, we want to make sure as it gets more and more powerful that we're focusing on that, and that's going to require collaboration between governments.
Between governments?
Yes, because this is global, and if
you don't think there's any deglobalization happening?
No, I think there's a lot of reglobalization happening. Companies are moving maybe from China more to India, more from China to Mexico. But the U.S. and China will have a record trade this year. For all the talk about decoupling, we're actually still trading a lot. And I think in every other way, we live in an age where we can now hear each other whisper. We can hear each other whisper. We could be doing this by Zoom right now with
Absolutely.
Me in my home in Bethesda, Maryland, and you here, and your viewers would barely know the difference.
Absolutely.
So when people tell me, and I've heard this since I wrote The World is Flat, the world isn't flat, it's lumpy, it's spiky, it's loopy. Get over it. The world is flat. People want to connect.
And it's going to become flatter according to you.
People want to connect. Girls just want to have fun, okay? People want to connect, and the technology is connecting us, all right? And that is a human need, and it's a human invention, and the two will always keep going forward. You can slow it down, you can block it, but what you use that connection for, that I don't predict at all. That can be good or ill. But the fact that we are able to connect in more ways on more days for less money than ever before, around more people, absolutely going on. The world is flatter than ever.
But if I take that theory of yours in toto, Mr. Friedman, then look at the Russian invasion in Ukraine. They should actually be collaborating.
Who should be collaborating?
Russia and Ukraine, they are neighbors.
Absolutely, they should be.
They should actually be collaborating. They should not, and you say that, Ukraine actually wants to move away to the West, and that is something you've written about, and you've written about very, very recently that Mr. Putin cannot allow.
Yeah. Well, that has nothing to do with the world being flat or not. That has to do with a leader who I think is a loser, Putin, and I think he came into the early 20th century and saw Russia actually taking off its economy, doing well in the early 20th century.
Yes.
And during that time, he was a distributor of wealth. That's how he built his legitimacy. But then he hit a wall. He hit a wall because to continue generating wealth required a kind of restructuring, liberalization, opening up the economy, more transparency, and he didn't want to do that. So he went from a distributor of wealth to a distributor of dignity. Okay? That's how he built his legitimacy. I'm going to recover the motherland, all right? And Ukraine is in our sphere of influence. But it turned out that in this day and age, you have to earn your sphere of influence. It's not like an honorary doctorate you get to put on the wall. And
you have to earn your respect.
you've got to win people's respect. People got to want to partner with you. And Ukrainians woke up and they looked at the European Union and they said, we want to be part of that. We don't want to be part of your kleptocracy, your thieving regime. And so Putin's a loser. And what he's done is terrible. Terrible for Ukrainians, terrible for Russians, terrible for Europe, terrible for the world. And I think in the long run, he will pay a great price for it. I think what he
in the interim, Ukraine is paying a price, and the largest relief package probably outside of you is stuck in your Senate.
Well, unfortunately, we have a generation. We have a party that's gone crazy. They're called the Republican Party, and they used to be a party that said the biggest threat to the United States is from Soviet communism. That was during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, 80s. Then we had the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now they think the biggest threat to America is wokeism, liberal, progressive, woke ideas. And since Vladimir Putin is one of the most anti-woke people on the planet, advocating sort of white Christian, values and
supremacy
and white supremacy and bare-chested,
machismo.
Real machismo.
Yeah, machismo.
They think he's their ally. We actually have a party that believes the biggest threat to America today.
Some people have named them the Putin wing of.
And that's what they are. They're a shameful group, but that's what they are.
But the fact is that, be that as it may, many people would see this reluctance of the United States as a very tricky situation currently in the Russia-US conflict, because Russia seems to be marching ahead and Ukrainians...
Yeah, there's no question Russia's doing better. I still don't think they can anywhere achieve their aims. I mean, this war has been a disaster for Vladimir Putin. He began this war thinking he could march into Ukraine, take a week, install his people there, and the war would be over. And instead, his army has been devastated by the war. He's lost hundreds of thousands of men killed and wounded. He's had to rely on convicts from prison now to fight his battles. He's lost thousands of tanks and military pieces. He got Finland and Sweden so scared that they joined NATO. This is in the category of stupid, idiotic things a leader has done in this century. That's right up there.
But what do you see? I mean, how does this end, Mr. Friedman? This, of course, the limit of the American intervention here has probably been exhausted, the sanctions, and the latest set of sanctions also probably, I mean, on Navalny's death, etc. But how do you see it coming to a close? I mean, where does it end?
I think we have to have it's going to end with a dirty deal, and Ukraine will have to cede territories to Russia in the east. I'm pretty sure that's how it's going to end. Russia will have to allow Ukraine into the European Union, and Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO for now. It'll have to get some other form of security help from the West. That's the only basis for a deal.
So you think, it's achievable
in theory, but only if Ukraine you can only get that deal if Ukraine continues to be aided by the West. Let me just say for a second, personally, I was the biggest opponent of NATO expansion back in the late 80s and 90s. I thought we did have to respect Russia's interests there. And I still believe shoving NATO right up in Putin's face is not a wise thing, okay? And so I'm not insensitive to those geopolitical concerns. But at the same time, we're in a different era, and Ukrainian people have made their choice. And they said, a future with Russia, a future with the European Union. We'd like a future with the European Union. And I think they're entitled to have that future.
Like all democracies.
Exactly.
Mr. Friedman, thank you very much for taking time out.
Pleasure.
As I said, you are one of the most influential public voices in this era. And I hope more power to your voice, more power to the voices of democracy.
It's great to be here with my Indian friends.